Doctor mistakenly injects millionaire's sperm into a poor virgin, changing his life forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Dr. Evelyn Marks rushed through the busy halls of Riverside Fertility Clinic, juggling 3 patient files and a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed to go wrong. 2 nurses had called in sick, the computer system was acting up, and she was already running an hour behind schedule. Dr. Marks, the sterling sample is ready for the procedure in room 3, her assistant called out, handing her another file. And the scholarship student is waiting in room 2 for her physical. Evelyn nodded, trying to keep all the information straight in her head. The Sterling case was a big one. Ethan Sterling, the tech millionaire who'd made headlines with his revolutionary software company, had come to freeze his sperm before undergoing experimental surgery. His family name carried weight, and the clinic had bent over backward to accommodate his privacy requests. In room 2, Rachel Monroe sat nervously on the examination table, smoothing down her worn jeans. At 22, she was younger than most of the clinic's patients. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clean but bargain store clothes spoke of someone who counted every penny. She'd only come to this fancy clinic because her college scholarship required a complete physical, and this was the only place that had an opening before the deadline. "Everything looks good," Dr. Marks said, scanning Rachel's file. "We'll just need to do a quick pelvic exam and some routine blood work." Rachel nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Thank you, doctor. I need to get back to my afternoon classes, so I appreciate you fitting me in." Dr. Marks prepared for the examination, her mind still partially on the Sterling procedure. As she reached for the necessary instruments, her assistant rushed in with another urgent message about a different patient, and in that moment of distraction, she grabbed the wrong syringe from her medical cart. The mistake wouldn't be discovered until weeks later. Rachel left the clinic that day thinking only about her upcoming midterms and her evening shift at the local diner. She had no way of knowing that her life had just changed forever. 3 weeks passed, and Rachel started feeling unusually tired. She blamed it on her packed schedule. Between classes, her job, and helping her younger siblings with their homework, she barely had time to breathe. But when the nausea started, a niggling worry began to grow in her mind. "That's impossible," she told herself firmly. Rachel had never even had a serious boyfriend. Between her studies and work, romance had always taken a back seat. Her mother used to tease her about being married to her textbooks, but the symptoms persisted, and finally she bought a pregnancy test from the drugstore near campus. When 2 pink lines appeared, her world tilted on its axis. "There has to be some mistake," Rachel whispered, staring at the test with shaking hands. She immediately called the clinic, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. The clinic's investigation moved quickly, and within days, the terrible truth emerged. Dr. Marks, reviewing the records with growing horror, discovered her fatal error. She had accidentally inseminated Rachel with Ethan Sterling's sperm sample. The news hit like a bomb. The clinic's legal team scrambled to contain the situation, but somehow the story leaked to the press. Within hours, Rachel's phone was ringing non-stop with calls from reporters. News vans parked outside her small apartment building, and her social media accounts exploded with messages. Ethan Sterling was in Tokyo when his assistant burst into his hotel suite with the news. His face turned ashen as he read the clinic's urgent message. "Find out everything about this girl," he barked into his phone, "and get my lawyers on it immediately. This has to be some kind of scam." But as his team dug into Rachel Monroe's background, they found nothing suspicious. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a hard-working college student from a modest background with an impeccable academic record and no history of legal troubles. Rachel's family reacted with disbelief and anger. Her mother, who had always been proud of her daughter's responsible nature, now looked at her with suspicion. "How could you do something like this?" her mother demanded during a tense family dinner. "Did you think you could trick your way into some rich man's life?" "Mom, I swear I didn't do anything wrong," Rachel protested, tears streaming down her face. "I just went for a routine physical. I don't even know how this happened." But her parents had already made up their minds. That night, Rachel left her childhood home with a small bag of belongings, her father's words ringing in her ears. "Until you tell us the truth, you're not welcome here." The media circus grew more intense each day. Tabloid headlines screamed about the virgin mother of a millionaire's baby and gold digger's miracle pregnancy. Rachel could barely leave her apartment without being ambushed by photographers. When Ethan Sterling finally returned to the country, his first action was to send his lawyers to meet with Rachel. They arrived at her tiny apartment with a contract and a check, with more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. "Mr. Sterling is prepared to be very generous," the lead lawyer said smoothly, sliding the papers across her kitchen table. "All he asks is that you terminate the pregnancy and sign a non-disclosure agreement." Rachel stared at the check, thinking about how that money could help her family, pay for her siblings' college education, and solve so many problems. Then she placed her hand protectively over her still flat stomach. "No," she said firmly, pushing the papers back. "I don't want his money, and I'm keeping this baby." The lawyers left, clearly shocked by her refusal. That evening, as Rachel sat alone in her apartment, eating reheated noodles and trying to figure out how she would manage as a single mother, her phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan Sterling himself. "Ms. Monroe," his voice was cold and controlled. "I think we need to meet in person." Neither of them knew it then, but that meeting would change everything. The private dining room at the Four Seasons Hotel felt bigger than Rachel's entire apartment. She sat nervously at the massive table, wearing the nicest dress she owned, a simple blue sundress she'd bought on clearance last summer. The waiter had already given her 3 odd looks, clearly wondering what someone like her was doing in a place like this. Ethan Sterling arrived exactly on time. He strode into the room like he owned it, which for all Rachel knew, maybe he did. At 35, he was everything the magazine covers had shown. Tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her yearly tuition, with dark hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Ms. Monroe," he said coldly, taking the seat across from her. "I assume my lawyers made our position clear." Rachel lifted her chin. "They did. And I made my position clear too. I'm keeping this baby. Do you have any idea what you're getting into?" Ethan's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. "This isn't some fairy tale where the poor girl gets a happy ending. This is my life, my reputation, my company's future at stake. And this is my baby," Rachel said quietly. "I didn't ask for this to happen, Mr. Sterling, but it did happen, and I'm going to deal with it the best way I know how." Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter bringing menus. Rachel stared at the prices in shock. One appetizer cost more than she made in a day at the diner. "I'll just have water," she said quickly, closing the menu. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Order whatever you want. I think I can afford it." "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. Not for lunch and not for anything else." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of respect. He studied her face carefully, as if trying to figure out her angle. "Everyone wants something," he said finally. "Name your price." Rachel stood up, her chair scraping against the expensive floor. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Sterling, and neither is this baby. I'll have my own lawyer contact yours about arranging reasonable visitation rights if you're interested in being part of the child's life. Otherwise, I'll handle this on my own." As she turned to leave, Ethan called out, "You really expect me to believe you don't want anything from me?" Rachel paused at the door. "What I want is to finish my degree, become a teacher, and give this baby a good life. I don't need a millionaire's money to do that. I just need to be left alone." She walked out of the hotel with her head held high, even as tears threatened to fall. Only when she was safely on the bus heading back to her apartment did she let herself cry. That evening, Ethan sat in his penthouse office staring at the report his private investigators had compiled on Rachel Monroe. Full scholarship student, works part-time at Joe's Diner, volunteers at a local literacy program teaching kids to read. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket, bank account barely breaking 3 figures. Everything about her story checked out. "She has to be playing some kind of long game," he muttered, pouring himself a drink. His phone rang. It was his mother, Eleanor Sterling. "Darling, please tell me you've handled this unfortunate situation." "She refused the money, Mother." Eleanor's laugh was sharp. "Everyone has a price, dear. Find hers." "That's just it," Ethan said slowly. "I don't think she does." The next few weeks brought more chaos. Rachel's story had gone viral, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. Social media was divided between those who praised her integrity and those who called her a calculating gold digger. Her inbox was flooded with interview requests from talk shows and magazines. At work, customers started recognizing her. Some left her extra-large tips with encouraging notes, while others made nasty comments under their breath. Her boss, Joe, finally called her into his office. "Rachel, honey," he said awkwardly, "maybe it's best if you take some time off. Until this all dies down." She knew what that really meant. Fighting back tears, Rachel hung up her apron for the last time. That night, as she sat in her apartment calculating how long she could survive on her savings, someone knocked on her door. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan Sterling, looking decidedly less polished than he had at the hotel. "What are you doing here?" she asked through the door. "I heard about your job," he said. "Let me in, Rachel, please." Against her better judgment, she opened the door. Ethan stepped inside, taking in the tiny studio apartment with its second-hand furniture and textbooks stacked everywhere. "I had you investigated," he admitted. "I was sure you were running some kind of scam. And I was wrong." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its perfect style. "Look, I'm not good at apologies, but I'm sorry about how I handled things, about the lawyers and the payoff attempt, all of it." Rachel sank onto her worn couch. "Why are you really here, Mr. Sterling?" "Ethan," he corrected. "And I'm here because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because I want to start over, do this right, whatever this is." "This is a baby," Rachel said simply. "Your baby, our baby, everything else, your money, your reputation, what people think, that's just noise." Ethan sat down in her only chair, looking strangely vulnerable despite his expensive suit. "I don't know how to do this, any of this. My world, it's all about control, numbers, deals. This is completely out of my control." "Welcome to real life," Rachel said with a small smile. "Nothing's ever really in our control." They talked for hours that night, about their families, their lives, their fears. Rachel told him about her dream of teaching kindergarten. Ethan talked about building his company from scratch, proving himself to a family that had always seen him as second best. When he finally left, something had shifted between them. They weren't friends exactly, but they weren't enemies anymore either. The next morning, a delivery truck arrived at Rachel's apartment. Inside were groceries, prenatal vitamins, and a note. "Let me help, not because you need it, but because I want to. E." Rachel stared at the note for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and typed out a message. "Thank you, but next time, ask first. I'm not completely helpless." His reply came quickly. "Noted. Dinner tomorrow? I promise to ask before ordering anything." Despite herself, Rachel smiled. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. Eleanor Sterling's heels clicked sharply against the marble floors of her son's penthouse office. At 62, she was still a striking woman, her silver hair perfectly styled and her designer suit impeccable. She'd spent decades cultivating the Sterling family's social position, and she wasn't about to let some small-town nobody ruin everything. "Mother," Ethan said without looking up from his computer, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't be cute, darling. You know exactly why I'm here." Eleanor placed a magazine on his desk. The cover showed a photo of Ethan and Rachel leaving a doctor's appointment together. The headline read, "Tech Billionaire's Baby Mama Drama, Love or Liability." "You need to end this ridiculous situation," Eleanor continued. "The board is concerned. Your father's old friends are asking questions. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family's reputation?" Ethan finally looked up. "The situation, as you call it, is my child, and Rachel is the mother of that child." "Oh, please." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "That girl is nothing but a gold digger who got lucky with a medical mistake. Our lawyers can handle everything quietly. Give her enough money and she'll disappear." "I offered her money, Mother. She turned it down flat." "Then offer her more." Eleanor's perfectly controlled facade cracked slightly. "Everyone has a price." "Not Rachel." Ethan stood up, his voice firm. "And I'm not asking her to disappear. In fact, I'm having dinner with her tonight." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious. Ethan, darling, think about what you're doing. That girl, she's not one of us. She works in a diner, for heaven's sake." "Worked," Ethan corrected. "She lost her job because of all this publicity, and she's studying to be a teacher." "A teacher?" Eleanor's laugh was cold. "Well, isn't that charming? And I suppose you think she'll be content living in some little apartment, teaching other people's children, while you run a billion-dollar company. What Rachel wants is to finish her degree and have a career of her own. She hasn't asked me for anything. Yet," Eleanor said ominously. "Just wait. They all want something in the end." Across town, Rachel was having her own family crisis. Her younger sister Jenny had sneaked over to her apartment, defying their parents' orders not to contact her. "Mom and Dad are being so stupid about this," Jenny said, hugging Rachel tight. "I told them you would never try to trap some rich guy. You didn't even date in high school." Rachel managed a small laugh. I think. So what's he like? Jenny perched on the kitchen counter, eyes bright with curiosity. The billionaire baby daddy. Says he as handsome as his pictures. Jenny, Rachel threw a dish towel at her sister. It's not like that, we're just trying to figure things out. But you like him, Jenny said shrewdly. I can tell by your face. Rachel busied herself with making tea. It doesn't matter if I like him or not. This isn't some romance novel, it's complicated. Because of his mom. When Rachel looked surprised, Jenny held up her phone. It's all over social media. Helena Sterling was photographed leaving his office looking super mad today. Everyone's saying she's trying to break you two up. There's nothing to break up, Rachel said firmly. We're just trying to handle this situation like adults. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Mother paid me a visit today. Dinner might be more interesting than planned. Still on? Rachel hesitated before replying. Should I be worried? His response came quickly. About Mother. Always. But don't let her scare you, I don't. That evening, Rachel arrived at the small Italian restaurant Ethan had chosen, a surprise departure from the upscale places he usually suggested. He was waiting outside, looking troubled. My mother's inside, he said without preamble. She invited herself. I'm so sorry. Rachel took a deep breath. It's fine. I had to meet her eventually, right? We can go somewhere else. No. Rachel straightened her shoulders. I'm not running away. Your mother wants to meet me. Fine. Let's give her that chance. Eleanor Sterling sat at the best table in the restaurant, looking distinctly out of place among the checkered tablecloths and casual atmosphere. Her eyes swept over Rachel's simple dress with barely concealed disdain. Ms. Monroe, she said coolly, how nice to finally meet you. Mrs. Sterling, Rachel replied, sitting down with more confidence than she felt. Thank you for joining us. Well, I had to see for myself what all the fuss was about. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tell me, dear, what exactly are your intentions toward my son? Mother, Ethan warned, but Rachel held up her hand. My intentions? Rachel met Eleanor's gaze steadily. My intention is to have this baby, finish my degree and build a good life. That's all. And I suppose that good life includes access to the Sterling fortune. No, it doesn't. Your son has offered me money several times. I've turned it down every time. The only thing I want from Ethan is for him to be involved in his child's life if that's what he chooses. Eleanor leaned forward. Let me be clear, Ms. Monroe. The Sterlings have worked for generations to build our position in society. We don't need some scandal threatening everything we've built. Name your price, and let's end this circus. Mother, enough. Ethan's voice was sharp, but Rachel stayed calm. Mrs. Sterling, I understand you're trying to protect your family, but this baby is your family too, your grandchild. You can choose to be part of that or not, but I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not for sale. She stood up, her dinner untouched. I think I should go. Thank you for the invitation, Ethan. Outside, the autumn air was crisp. Rachel hurried down the street, fighting back tears. She heard footsteps behind her. Rachel, wait! Ethan caught up to her. I'm sorry about my mother. She had no right. She's trying to protect you, Rachel said quietly. I get it. But I won't let her or anyone else make me feel ashamed of who I am or where I come from. Ethan reached for her hand. You shouldn't. Rachel, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And He paused, seeming to surprise himself with what he was about to say. I'm starting to think this mistake might be the best thing that's ever happened to me. Rachel looked down at their joined hands. Your mother will never accept me. Then that's her loss. He squeezed her hand. Let me take you home. I can take the bus. I know you can, but I'd like to take you home, if that's okay. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. As they walked to his car, neither let go of the other's hand. Back in the restaurant, Eleanor Sterling watched through the window, her face tight with anger. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. It's me, she said. I need you to dig deeper into Rachel Monroe's past. Everyone has secrets. Find hers. The morning sickness hit Rachel hard during her morning classes. She barely made it to the bathroom in time, earning concerned looks from her classmates. At 4 months pregnant, she was starting to show, and her usual loose sweaters weren't hiding it anymore. Rachel? Professor Martinez caught her after class. Are you all right? You've missed several classes lately. I'm fine, Rachel said quickly. Just a little under the weather. The professor's eyes flickered to Rachel's midsection. I've seen the news. If you need extra time for assignments... Please, Rachel interrupted. I don't want special treatment. I can handle it. But handling it was getting harder. Without her job at the diner, her savings were dwindling fast. The pregnancy was making her tired all the time, and keeping up with her classes was becoming a struggle. Still, she refused to ask Ethan for help. Meanwhile, Eleanor Sterling's investigator had been busy. He sat in her elegant home office, spreading photos across her desk. "Rachel Monroe's past is pretty clean," he admitted, "but I found something interesting about her father." Eleanor leaned forward, a predatory smile on her face. "Tell me everything." Across town, Ethan was showing Rachel the newly renovated penthouse nursery. He'd had the whole floor redone, with a separate apartment for Rachel if she wanted it. "It's beautiful," Rachel said softly, touching the hand-painted mural of a forest scene. "But Ethan, I told you, I'm keeping my apartment." I know, but you could use this place too, for weekends. Or when the baby—" He stopped as Rachel suddenly grabbed his arm, her face lighting up. "The baby's kicking!" She pressed his hand to her stomach. "Feel it?" Ethan's expression changed as he felt the small flutter under his palm. For a moment, all the complications fell away, and they were just two people sharing something miraculous. The moment was broken by Ethan's phone ringing. "It's the office. I have to take this." While he stepped out, Rachel wandered the penthouse. Everything was so perfect, so expensive. She felt out of place here, like a character who had wandered into the wrong story. Her own phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. It was a photo of her father being led away in handcuffs, dated 15 years ago. Another text followed. "Does Ethan know about your father's time in prison, or about the money he stole from his company's pension fund?" Rachel sank into a nearby chair, shaking. Her father's arrest had torn their family apart when she was just 7. He'd served 5 years for embezzlement, and afterward, they'd moved to a new town for a fresh start. Rachel had worked so hard to build a different life, to be nothing like him. "Rachel," Ethan returned, frowning when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" She quickly put her phone away. "Nothing. Just tired. I should go home." That evening, Eleanor received another visit. This time it was from Thomas Wright, Ethan's chief financial officer and oldest friend. "You wanted to see me, Mrs. Sterling?" "Thomas, dear, you've known Ethan since college. You care about his welfare, don't you?" "Of course." Eleanor handed him a file. "Then you should know what kind of family he's getting involved with. The board needs to be informed. After all, if Ethan's judgment is compromised..." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling, I don't think..." "Think of the company, Thomas. Think of all the investors who trust the Sterling name. Can we really let some girl with criminal connections damage everything we've built?" The next day, Rachel arrived at her tiny apartment to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a check for $1 million and a note. "Leave now, before the truth comes out. This is your only chance." She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan, asking if she wanted to have dinner. She stared at his message, feeling the weight of her father's secrets crushing her. Before she could reply, another text came through. "The board meeting is tomorrow. How do you think Ethan will react when he learns about your family's criminal past?" Rachel's hands shook as she dialed her sister's number. "Jenny, I need help. Can you come over?" An hour later, Jenny sat on Rachel's bed, holding her sobbing sister. "You have to tell him yourself, Rach, before someone else does. He'll hate me. He'll think I was trying to hide it. You were 7 years old when it happened. It's not your fault." But Rachel couldn't shake the fear. She'd seen how important reputation was in Ethan's world. How would he react knowing his child's grandfather was an ex-convict? That night she couldn't sleep. Around midnight she got dressed and took a taxi to Ethan's building. The doorman knew her by now and let her up. Ethan answered his door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking worried. "Rachel, is something wrong? Is it the baby?" "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "And after I do, if you want me to leave and never come back, I'll understand." He led her to the couch, his face serious. "Rachel, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She took a deep breath and began to tell him everything. About her father's crime, the years of shame, the family's struggle to rebuild. As she talked, tears ran down her face. "Someone's been sending me threats," she finished. "They're going to tell the board tomorrow. I needed you to hear it from me first." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. Rachel's heart felt like it was breaking. "I'll go," she whispered, standing up. "I'm so sorry." "Why?" She stopped. "What?" Ethan turned around, his face angry, but not at her. "Why are you sorry? You were a child. You did nothing wrong." "But my father..." "Is not you." He crossed the room and took her hands. "Rachel, look at me. Do you know why I first started to fall for you? Because you're nothing like the people in my world. You're real, honest, you work hard, and you don't give up. Your mother will have to deal with it. His eyes narrowed. The threats, the timing. This has my mother's fingerprints all over it. Rachel touched his arm. Ethan, she's your mother, and this is my child, our child. He placed his hand on her stomach. I'm done letting her control my life. Tomorrow at the board meeting, I'm going to tell them everything. About my mother's schemes, about the real reason I've been working so much lately. What real reason? Ethan's face softened. Because I've been restructuring the company, setting up a charitable foundation, meeting with education experts. I want to create a program that helps kids whose families have been affected by white-collar crime. Kids like you were. Rachel stared at him in shock. You've been planning this. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted it to be perfect. Because, he took a deep breath, because I love you, Rachel Monroe, and I want to build something meaningful with you. If you'll let me. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom buzzed with tension. 12 board members sat around the massive mahogany table, while Eleanor Sterling stood at the head, radiating confidence. She'd spent all night preparing for this moment. Thank you all for coming to this emergency meeting, she began smoothly. As you know, our company's reputation is our most valuable asset. Today, we need to discuss a serious threat to that reputation. The door opened and Ethan walked in, but he wasn't alone. Rachel was with him, holding his hand. Eleanor's perfectly practiced smile faltered. What is she doing here? Eleanor hissed. She's here because I want her here, Ethan said firmly. Since we're discussing my personal life, I thought the board should meet the woman you're so determined to destroy. Thomas Wright shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The file Eleanor had given him sat unopened in front of him. Members of the board, Eleanor continued, trying to regain control. I have some disturbing information about Ms. Monroe's family background that you need to be aware of. You mean about my father's conviction for embezzlement? Rachel's clear voice cut through the room. About how he served 5 years in prison when I was 7 years old. The board members murmured among themselves. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Yes, she said triumphantly. A convicted felon. Is this really the kind of connection we want for the Sterling name? My father made a terrible mistake, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. He paid for it. My family lost everything. That's why I've worked so hard my whole life, to prove that we're not defined by our worst mistakes. A touching story, Eleanor said coldly, but hardly relevant to... Actually, Mother, it's completely relevant. Ethan stepped forward. Because Rachel's experience is exactly why I've been working on the Sterling Second Chance Foundation. He pressed a button, and the boardroom screen lit up with presentations and financial projections. For the past 3 months, I've been developing a program to help families affected by white-collar crime, educational support, counseling, job training, breaking the cycle of shame and secrecy that destroys communities. The board members leaned forward, interested. Thomas Wright spoke up. The PR potential for this is incredible. Social responsibility is huge with younger investors. This isn't about PR, Ethan said firmly. It's about doing something meaningful with our wealth and influence. And yes, Rachel inspired it, because she showed me that there's more to life than profit margins and stock prices. Eleanor wasn't finished. This girl has clouded your judgment. The board can't possibly... The board, interrupted Margaret Chen, the oldest member, is very interested in this initiative. Please continue, Ethan. For the next hour, Ethan laid out his plans. The foundation would start with $100 million endowment. They would partner with universities, including Rachel's, to create scholarship programs. There would be mentorship opportunities, job placement assistance, family counseling. And Rachel, Ethan added, squeezing her hand, has agreed to help develop the educational component once she finishes her teaching degree. Eleanor watched in horror as her carefully built opposition crumbled. One by one, the board members voiced their support for Ethan's plan. This is the kind of forward thinking we need, Margaret Chen declared. The Sterling name shouldn't just stand for wealth. It should stand for redemption and hope. You can't be serious, Eleanor protested. This girl, she's nobody. She works in a diner. Worked, Rachel corrected quietly. I lost that job because of all this publicity. But you know what? I'm proud of that job. It taught me more about hard work and dignity than all your society parties ever could. Thomas Wright stood up suddenly. I need to say something. He picked up Eleanor's file and walked over to Ethan. Your mother asked me to present this to the board, information about Rachel's family, but I can't do it. You're my friend, Ethan, and what's being done here, it's wrong. He dropped the file in the shredder by the door. Eleanor's face went pale. "Thomas, you traitor! That's enough, Mother." Ethan's voice was steel. "You've gone too far. Using my friends against me, threatening Rachel, trying to manipulate the board, and it ends now. Everything I've done for you, for this company." "No," Ethan said sadly. "You did it for yourself, for control. But I'm not that little boy anymore, desperate for your approval. I'm a man who's about to be a father, and I won't let my child grow up in the kind of toxic environment I did." Rachel stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling, I know you're trying to protect your son, but you're only pushing him away. This baby, it's your grandchild. Do you really want to miss out on that because of pride?" Eleanor stared at them both, her perfectly maintained facade cracking. For a moment, she looked old and tired. "The board meeting is adjourned," Margaret Chen announced. "I think we've all heard enough." As the board members filed out, many stopped to congratulate Ethan and Rachel. Eleanor remained frozen in place, watching her power slip away. Finally, only the three of them remained. Rachel felt the baby kick and winced slightly. Ethan immediately put his arm around her. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" The tender gesture seemed to break something in Eleanor. She sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking. "I only wanted to protect you," she whispered. "Everything I've done, it was all for you." Rachel looked at Ethan, then surprised them both by walking over to Eleanor. She took the older woman's hand. "It's not too late," Rachel said gently. "This baby is going to need a grandmother, someone to teach them about style and society and all the things I know nothing about. But that can only happen if you're willing to let go of your anger." Eleanor looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. "You truly love my son, don't you?" "Yes," Rachel said simply. "Not his money, not his name, just him." Ethan joined them, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Give us a chance, Mother. Give yourself a chance." Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I need time. We have time," Rachel said, placing Eleanor's hand on her stomach just as the baby kicked again. "Your grandchild isn't going anywhere." For the first time since this all began, Eleanor Sterling smiled, a real smile, not her society mask. And in that moment, something shifted. The future was still uncertain, but at least now there was hope. 3 months after the board meeting showdown, Rachel woke up in the middle of the night with sharp pains in her stomach. She was 7 months pregnant now, and something felt terribly wrong. "It's too early," she whispered, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. She called Ethan, who answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "Rachel, what's wrong?" "The baby, something's wrong. I need to go to the hospital." "I'm on my way. Don't move." 15 minutes later, Ethan rushed into her apartment, still wearing the suit from his late meeting. He found Rachel curled up on her bed, crying in pain. "Hold on, sweetheart," he said, gathering her in his arms. "I've got you." At the hospital, the emergency room staff rushed Rachel into examination. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in high-risk pregnancies, studied the monitors with a worried expression. "The baby's in distress," she explained. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and there are signs of preeclampsia. We need to get it under control immediately." Ethan gripped Rachel's hand. "What does that mean? Will they be okay?" "We're going to do everything we can," Dr. Chen assured them. "But Rachel needs to stay in the hospital for observation. This pregnancy has become high risk." As the medical team worked to stabilize Rachel, Ethan stepped into the hallway to make a call. To his surprise, his mother answered immediately. "Ethan, do you know what time it is? Rachel's in the hospital. The baby, they're both in danger." There was a pause, then Eleanor's voice changed. "Which hospital? I'm coming." An hour later, Eleanor arrived, looking strange without her usual perfect makeup and designer clothes. She found Ethan pacing in the waiting room. "How is she?" "They're still running tests." "Mother, I'm scared. If anything happens to them..." Eleanor did something she hadn't done since Ethan was a child. She hugged him. "Your father and we had complications when I was pregnant with you. I nearly lost you at 6 months." Ethan pulled back, surprised. "You never told me that. There are a lot of things I never told you." Eleanor's voice was soft. Maybe that's why I hold on too tight sometimes." Dr. Chen emerged from Rachel's room. "Mr. Sterling, we've stabilized her for now, but she'll need to stay here for the remainder of her pregnancy. The next few weeks are critical. Can I see her? She's asking for you." And Dr. Chen glanced at Eleanor. She asked for her mother-in-law too. Eleanor's eyes widened at the term. Inside the hospital room, Rachel looked small and pale against the white sheets. Monitors beeped steadily, measuring both her heartbeat and the baby's. "I'm sorry," she said weakly. "I tried to be strong." "Stop that," Ethan said firmly, kissing her forehead. You are strong, the strongest person I know. Eleanor stepped forward hesitantly. Rachel, dear, is there anything you need? Anything at all? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I miss my mum, but she still won't talk to me. Eleanor's face set with determination. Give me her number. Mother, what are you? Trust me, darling. For once in your life, just trust me. Rachel gave Eleanor her parents' number. The older woman stepped into the hallway, her back straight with purpose. 10 minutes later, they heard her voice, clear and commanding. Mrs. Monroe? This is Eleanor Sterling. No, don't hang up. Your daughter is in the hospital and she needs her mother. Now you can either continue this ridiculous standoff and miss the birth of your grandchild, or you can be the parent Rachel deserves. The choice is yours. There was a long pause. Then Eleanor's voice softened. I understand pride, believe me. I understand wanting to protect your family name, but I almost lost my son because of that pride. Don't make the same mistake I did. Another pause. Yes, I'll text you the hospital details. And Mrs. Monroe, bring her father too. It's time we all started fresh. When Eleanor returned to the room, Rachel was crying again, but this time with hope. Thank you, she whispered. Eleanor touched her cheek gently. Rest now, dear. Your family will be here soon. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, medical tests, and worried waiting. Rachel's parents arrived the morning after Eleanor's call. There were tears, apologies, and finally, healing. Her father, John Monroe, pulled Ethan aside one day. I need you to know, he said gruffly, what I did, the shame of it. I never wanted Rachel to carry that burden. She doesn't, Ethan assured him. If anything, your mistake helped shape her into the amazing woman she is. And now, through the foundation, she's going to help other families heal too. The doctors kept Rachel on strict bed rest. Eleanor practically moved into the hospital, using her influence to ensure Rachel had the best care possible. She brought books, arranged for Rachel's professors to let her complete coursework from her hospital bed, and most surprisingly, became Rachel's fiercest advocate with the medical staff. Not enough pillows, she'd snap at nurses, and this room is too cold, my daughter needs another blanket. Rachel and Ethan exchanged amused looks at the word daughter, but neither corrected her. One night, as Rachel slept, Eleanor sat with Ethan in the hospital corridor. I've been thinking, she said slowly. The east wing of the mansion, it's just sitting empty. It has its own entrance, plenty of space for a nursery. Mother, just listen. Rachel won't give up her independence, I understand that now, but having family nearby, especially with a new baby, it could be good for everyone. Ethan studied his mother's face. You really have changed, haven't you? Let's say I'm trying. Eleanor smoothed her skirt. Your father called today. He's cutting his Europe trip short to come home. Because of the baby? Because I told him if he misses his first grandchild's birth, he shouldn't bother coming home at all. Ethan laughed, then sobered as alarms suddenly started blaring in Rachel's room. Medical staff rushed in as Rachel's monitors went crazy. Blood pressure's crashing. We're losing the baby's heartbeat. Get Dr. Chen in here now. Ethan and Eleanor could only watch in horror as their world teetered on the edge of disaster. Get her to the OR now. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. We need to do an emergency C-section. Rachel's eyes flew open in panic. Ethan, it's too early. I'm right here. He rushed to her side, taking her hand. I'm not leaving you. Sir, you'll need to wait outside. A nurse tried to stop him. Like hell I will. Ethan's voice was steel. That's my family in there. Dr. Chen nodded quickly. Let him come, but he needs to gown up now. Eleanor grabbed Rachel's hand before they wheeled her away. You fight. Do you hear me? Both of you fight. In the operating room, machines beeped urgently as the medical team worked. Rachel's blood pressure was dangerously low, and the baby's heartbeat kept fading in and out. Stay with me, Rachel, Dr. Chen commanded as she worked. Talk to me. Tell me about the nursery you're planning. Rachel's voice was weak. Ethan. He painted clouds on the ceiling. That's right. What else? A rocking chair. By the window. Rachel's voice faded. She's crashing, someone shouted. No, 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 Ethan pleaded. Rachel, honey, stay with me. Please stay with me. The next few minutes were a blur of medical terms and urgent actions. Then suddenly a tiny cry pierced the air. It's a girl, Dr. Chen announced. But there was no time to celebrate. As soon as the baby was out, the team focused on Rachel, whose vitals were still critical. We're losing her. Starting transfusion now. BP still dropping. Ethan found himself torn between watching his newborn daughter being worked on by one medical team and his Rachel fighting for her life with another. In the waiting room, both families had gathered. Eleanor paced while Rachel's parents huddled together praying. Jenny, Rachel's sister, kept wiping tears from her eyes. The door burst open, and an older man in an expensive but rumpled suit rushed in. "Eleanor, I got here as fast as I could." "William," Eleanor fell into her husband's arms. "Our granddaughter. She's being born right now. But Rachel..." William Sterling held his wife tightly. "That girl has more strength than all of us put together. She'll pull through." Hours passed. The baby was stabilized and moved to the NICU. She was small but fighting hard, just like her mother. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, looking exhausted but smiling. "They're both stable," she announced. It was touch and go for a while, but Rachel pulled through. She's in recovery now. The collective relief in the room was palpable. Eleanor sank into a chair, while Rachel's mother burst into fresh tears. "Can we see them?" Jenny asked. "Rachel needs rest, but you can see the baby through the NICU window. She's quite the little fighter, 7 weeks early, but already showing a strong personality." As the families walked to the NICU, Eleanor found herself between Rachel's parents. "I owe you both an apology," she said quietly. "The way I treated Rachel, the things I said about your family." John Monroe shook his head. "We all made mistakes. But that little girl in there, she's giving us all a chance to do better." Through the NICU window, they could see Ethan standing over an incubator. His hand reached through one of the ports to touch his daughter's tiny hand. "Look at that," William Sterling murmured. "Our boy's a father." The baby was small but perfect, with a tuft of dark hair like Ethan's and Rachel's delicate features. Tubes and wires surrounded her, but she gripped Ethan's finger with surprising strength. "She needs a name," Eleanor said softly. "Hope," came a weak voice behind them. They turned to see Rachel being wheeled in a hospital bed, looking pale but determined. "Her name is Hope." "Rachel!" Jenny rushed to her sister's side. "Should you be out of bed?" "I had to see her." Rachel's eyes were fixed on the incubator. Dr. Chen said just for a minute. Ethan came out of the NICU and went straight to Rachel, kissing her forehead. "You scared me," he whispered. "Sorry about that." Rachel managed a small smile. "How is she?" "Perfect. Small but perfect, just like her mum." Eleanor stepped forward. "Hope Sterling. It's a beautiful name." "Hope Monroe Sterling," Rachel corrected gently. "If that's okay? I want her to have both families' names." "More than okay." Eleanor's voice wavered. "It's perfect." Through the window, baby Hope waved her tiny fists, already showing the fighting spirit that ran in both sides of her family. William cleared his throat. "Eleanor told me about offering you the east wing of the mansion." "Dad?" Ethan started, but Rachel interrupted. "Actually," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about that. Not right away, but maybe once Hope is stronger. It might be nice to have family close by." Ethan stared at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" "Life's too short to let pride get in the way of family." Rachel looked at her own parents. "All our lives we've been running from the past, trying to prove ourselves. Maybe it's time to stop running and start building something new." Dr. Chen appeared with a wheelchair. "All right, that's enough excitement. Back to bed, young lady." As they wheeled Rachel away, she kept her eyes on her daughter as long as possible. Ethan walked alongside, still holding her hand. The two sets of grandparents stayed at the window, watching Hope. "She really is perfect, isn't she?" Eleanor said softly. "She is," Rachel's mother agreed. "And so is your son. The way he loves our Rachel, the way she loves him back." Eleanor smiled. "We're going to have our hands full with these three, aren't we? Good thing they'll have all of us to help." Through the NICU window, baby Hope slept peacefully, unaware that her dramatic entrance into the world had done more than just expand her family. It had healed it. The first weeks after Hope's birth fell into a careful routine. Rachel was released from the hospital after 5 days, but Hope needed to stay in the NICU until she gained more strength. Every morning, Rachel and Ethan would arrive as soon as visiting hours started, spending hours by their daughter's incubator. "She gained another 2 ounces, Rachel announced proudly one morning, reading the chart. She was sitting in a rocking chair next to Hope's incubator, having just finished her first attempt at kangaroo care, holding Hope skin to skin against her chest. "That's our girl," Ethan beamed. He had rearranged his entire schedule to be there every day, running his company from a laptop in the NICU waiting room. The nurses had come to know the whole extended family. Eleanor appeared every day at precisely 2 p.m., impeccably dressed and carrying designer baby clothes that were still much too big for Hope. "For when she's ready," Eleanor would say, arranging tiny cashmere sweaters and silk bonnets in the storage space under Hope's incubator. Rachel's mother, Sarah, usually came in the evenings, bringing home-cooked meals to make sure Rachel was keeping up her strength. The two grandmothers had formed an unexpected alliance, coordinating their visits and sharing concerns about Rachel overdoing it. "You need to rest more," Eleanor insisted one afternoon, finding Rachel dozing in the rocking chair. "I'm fine," Rachel started to say, but Sarah Monroe cut her off. "Listen to Eleanor, sweetheart. Hope needs you healthy." Rachel smiled tiredly. "Are you two ganging up on me now?" "Absolutely," both grandmothers said in unison. The fathers had their own way of coping. John Monroe spent hours telling Hope stories about Rachel's childhood, while William Sterling would read the financial papers to her, claiming it was never too early to learn about investments. One evening, Ethan found the two men in deep conversation outside the NICU. "I lost everything," John was saying quietly. "My job, my reputation, my self-respect. The money wasn't worth what it cost my family." William was silent for a moment. "I missed most of Ethan's childhood chasing the next big deal. Different kind of price, but still too high. Maybe that's why those two found each other." John nodded toward the NICU, where Rachel was singing softly to Hope, "To help us all learn what really matters." The biggest surprise came from Eleanor. She had taken over the renovation of the East Wing with her usual efficiency, but with a new sensitivity to Rachel's wishes. "I was thinking soft yellows for the nursery," she said one day, showing Rachel color swatches. "Unless you'd prefer something else?" Rachel hesitated. "I always imagined lavender." "Lavender it is," Eleanor said immediately. "And what about the kitchen? You mentioned liking to cook." Step by step, the East Wing was transforming into a perfect blend of luxury and comfort. Eleanor even hired Jenny, Rachel's sister, to help with the design, recognizing her talent for interior decoration. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, a society reporter managed to slip into the NICU waiting room, hoping to snap pictures of the billion-dollar baby. Eleanor found him first. The old Eleanor might have caused a scene, but instead, she calmly led him to a private corner. "That child in there," she said quietly, "is not a story. She's my granddaughter. She's fighting for every breath, and her parents are going through hell. So you have a choice. You can leave now, dignity intact, or I can make sure you never work in journalism again. But if one word about Hope appears in print before her parents are ready, you'll learn exactly why the Sterling name carries so much weight." The reporter left. Eleanor smoothed her silk blouse and went back to reading Goodnight Moon to Hope. Rachel, who had witnessed the exchange, touched Eleanor's arm. "Thank you. Nobody messes with my girls," Eleanor said simply. As the days passed, Hope grew stronger. She began breathing more on her own and her feeding tube was removed. Rachel and Ethan learned to change her tiny diapers and read her vital signs. "Blood pressure's good," Ethan would report every morning, studying the monitors like they were crucial market reports. "Temperature's perfect," Rachel would add, having memorized all the normal ranges. Dr. Chen watched their dedication with approval. "She's lucky to have such devoted parents." "And grandparents," she added, as Eleanor arrived with yet another tiny designer outfit. 1 month after Hope's birth, Dr. Chen gathered the family with exciting news. "She's ready to go home," she announced. "Her weight is good, her breathing is strong, and all her tests look excellent." The room erupted in joy, but Rachel felt a sudden panic. "Home," she whispered to Ethan. "Are we ready?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "Together, remember? We'll figure it out together." Eleanor stepped forward. "The East Wing is ready whenever you are, but no pressure. Whatever you decide." Rachel looked at her parents, who nodded encouragingly, then at Eleanor and William, who tried not to look too hopeful. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time to come home. All of us." The next day, as they prepared to leave the hospital, each family member had a role. Sarah packed Hope's things, while John installed the car seat. William handled the paperwork, while Eleanor supervised everything. Jenny took photos, and both sets of grandparents hovered anxiously as Rachel dressed Hope in a going-home outfit, a compromise between Eleanor's designer tastes and Rachel's simpler style. "Ready?" Ethan asked softly, watching Rachel cradle their daughter. Rachel looked at their assembled family, her parents who had overcome their shame to stand proud, Eleanor who had traded control for love, William who was learning to put family first, Jenny who had found her calling, and Ethan who had given her not just love but a whole new understanding of family. "Ready," she smiled. "Let's take our daughter home." As they walked out of the hospital, Hope opened her eyes that somehow managed to be both Rachel's gentle brown and Ethan's intense green. "Look who's awake," Eleanor cooed. "Welcome to the world, little one. You have quite a family waiting for you." Hope yawned and gripped Rachel's finger with her tiny hand. Holding on tight, just as her family had learned to hold on to each other. The east wing of the Sterling mansion quickly became a home within a home. Rachel had worried it would feel overwhelming, but instead it felt just right. The lavender nursery was peaceful, the kitchen was perfect for her stress-baking sessions, and most importantly, it had its own entrance so she could maintain her independence while still being close to family. One morning, 3 months after bringing Hope home, Rachel was attempting to finish a paper for her teaching degree while balancing Hope in her lap. The baby had grown into a happy, healthy infant who looked more like both her parents every day. "Need help?" Eleanor appeared in the doorway, immaculately dressed as always. "Would you mind? I just need to finish this conclusion." Eleanor scooped up her granddaughter with practiced ease. Gone were the days when she worried about baby spit up on her designer clothes. These days, she kept a supply of burp cloths color-coordinated with her outfits. "Come to Grandma, precious," she cooed. "Let's go see what your other grandmother is doing in the garden." Rachel smiled, watching them go. The two grandmothers had become an unstoppable team, with Sarah Monroe's practical parenting experience complementing Eleanor's organizational skills perfectly. Later that afternoon, Ethan found Rachel in their living room surrounded by bridal magazines that Eleanor had been leaving around casually. "Mother's getting subtle in her hints," he laughed, sitting beside her. "She left a post-it marking the Sterling family tiara in one of them." Rachel held up a magazine. "Think she's trying to tell us something?" The truth was, they had been so focused on Hope that wedding planning had taken a back seat. But lately, Rachel had found herself thinking about it more and more. "We could just elope," Ethan suggested, only half joking. "Your mother would hunt us down," Rachel laughed. "Besides," she hesitated, "I think I want the whole thing. The dress, the vows, our families together. Is that crazy?" "Not crazy at all." Ethan pulled her close. "You deserve everything you want. Although," he added with a grin, "Mother might spontaneously combust if we don't let her help plan it." As if summoned by the conversation, Eleanor appeared. "Did someone say wedding planning?" "Mother, were you lurking in the hallway?" "Of course not," Eleanor said, dignified. "I was simply passing by. But since you mentioned it," she pulled out a thick binder. "I may have some ideas." Rachel and Ethan exchanged amused looks. "Let's see them," Rachel said. To their surprise, Eleanor's ideas were a perfect blend of elegance and simplicity. She had clearly paid attention to Rachel's taste over the past months. "The garden would be lovely in spring," Eleanor suggested. "Small ceremony, just family and close friends, unless you'd prefer something grander." "The garden sounds perfect," Rachel said softly. "But, Jabet," Rachel took a deep breath, "I'd like to do something for the foundation too. Maybe instead of wedding gifts, people could donate to help other families." Eleanor's eyes welled up unexpectedly. "Oh, my dear girl," she hugged Rachel tight. "Mother, are you crying?" "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor sniffed, dabbing her eyes. "I'm simply appreciating my future daughter-in-law's generous spirit." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations, but with a distinctly Rachel and Ethan twist. The Sterling Foundation became integrated into every aspect. Local vendors were chosen specifically from families who had been helped by the foundation. Rachel's wedding dress would be made by a designer whose father's white-collar crime had once torn their family apart. One evening, Rachel found her father sitting alone in the garden, looking thoughtful. "Penny, for your thoughts?" She sat beside him. "Just thinking about how different things might have been," John said quietly. If I'd made better choices." "Dad, stop. Look at where we are now. Look at what we've built from it." "You built it," he corrected. "You and Ethan, taking something painful and turning it into hope for others. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Inside, Eleanor was having a similar conversation with Ethan. "I was so wrong about her," she admitted. "About everything, really. The way we raised you, always putting appearance and status first. Mother, you did your best. Perhaps. But Rachel's shown us all a better way, hasn't she? Who would have thought my grandchild's mother would end up teaching me about what really matters in life?" The wedding plans proceeded, with both grandmothers deep in preparation mode. Sarah handled the practical details, while Eleanor managed the social aspects. William and John found themselves bonding over their shared bewilderment at wedding terminology. "What exactly is a charger plate?" John asked one day. "No idea," William replied, "but apparently we need 300 of them." Jenny threw herself into the role of maid of honor, while also continuing her work on other projects for the foundation. She had found her calling in helping families create new homes after financial crises. Hope, now almost 4 months old, was growing into a happy, sociable baby. She had Ethan's smile and Rachel's gentle nature, combined with what Eleanor called the sterling determination. "She's going to be a force to be reckoned with," Eleanor predicted proudly, watching Hope grab at her pearl necklace. One night, after a long day of wedding planning, Rachel and Ethan sat in the nursery, watching Hope sleep. "Having second thoughts?" Ethan asked softly. "About marrying you?" "Never." Rachel leaned against him. "About letting your mother order dove-shaped ice sculptures?" "Maybe." Ethan laughed. "She means well." "I know. And honestly, I love that she cares so much, that everyone cares so much." Rachel touched Hope's tiny hand. "A year ago I felt so alone, now look at us." A regular modern fairy tale. Ethan kissed her temple, complete with a dramatic medical crisis, family redemption, and a baby who brought everyone together. "Don't forget the evil mother-in-law who turned out to have a heart of gold." "I heard that." Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. She entered carrying tea and cookies. "I prefer to think of myself as misunderstood." They all laughed. Careful not to wake Hope. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, sitting down with them, "about the Foundation's next project. What if we created a scholarship program for students whose parents have been incarcerated for white-collar crimes?" Rachel's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. We could help them break the cycle, give them opportunities. Like the opportunities you made for yourself," Eleanor said softly. "Even when everything was against you." Hope stirred in her crib, making little snuffling noises. All three of them turned to watch her, their hearts full of love for this tiny being who had changed everything. "2 weeks until the wedding," Eleanor said finally. "Are you ready?" Rachel looked at Ethan, then at Hope, then at Eleanor. "More than ready. We've already got everything that really matters." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Yes, my dear, we certainly do." The Sterling Mansion's garden bloomed with spring flowers on the morning of the wedding. White chairs lined the lawn, and soft music drifted through the air. In the east wing, Rachel stood in front of a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Sarah Monroe adjusted her daughter's veil. The wedding dress, with its simple elegance, had been created by Maria Chen, one of the Foundation's first success stories. "Something borrowed." Eleanor stepped forward, carefully placing the Sterling family tiara on Rachel's head. "My mother wore this, I wore this, and now it's yours." "Something blue," Jenny added, showing the tiny blue butterfly she'd embroidered inside the dress hem. "And something old." Rachel's father appeared in the doorway, holding a small box. Inside was her grandmother's pearl necklace. "Mom would have wanted you to have this today." Rachel touched the pearls gently. "I wish she could be here." "She is, honey," Sarah said softly. "She's watching. They all are." In another part of the mansion, Ethan was adjusting his tie when William entered. "Son," he said seriously, "I know I haven't always been the most present father. Work always came first. And Dad, it's okay." "No, let me finish." William placed his hands on Ethan's shoulders. "Watching you with Hope, seeing how you've changed everything for Rachel, for the Foundation, I've never been prouder. You're twice the man I ever was." They hugged, years of unspoken emotions passing between them. A soft cry from the nursery interrupted the moment. Hope, now 6 months old, was awake from her nap and dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's. "There's my girl," Ethan lifted her up, "ready to steal the show at Mommy and Daddy's wedding." In the garden, guests were arriving, but these weren't the usual society faces at Sterling events. Among the crowd were families helped by the Foundation, Rachel's college friends, and people from all walks of life who had become part of their story. Dr. Chen, who had saved both Rachel and Hope's lives, sat in the front row. Joe from the diner was there too. He'd catered the reception, his business now thriving thanks to a Foundation grant. Thomas Wright, who had shredded Eleanor's file that day in the boardroom, served as best man. He watched with a smile as Eleanor fussed over every detail, so different from the cold society matron she'd once been. The music changed, and everyone stood. John Monroe took his daughter's arm, his eyes glistening. "Last chance to elope," he whispered. Rachel laughed softly. "Not a chance, Dad. We've got too many people to thank." The ceremony was everything they'd hoped for. Hope, carried by Jenny, behaved perfectly until the final moments when she reached for her parents, creating a spontaneous group hug that made everyone laugh through happy tears. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, it felt like a formality. They'd already proven their love and commitment through every trial and challenge. At the reception, Eleanor clinked her glass for attention. "A year ago," she began, "I thought I was protecting my family by trying to keep someone out. Instead, I almost lost everything that mattered. Rachel," she turned to her new daughter-in-law, You didn't just make my son happy. You made him better. You made us all better. Rachel stood to hug her mother-in-law, both women crying openly now. The foundation announcement came next. Ethan and Rachel unveiled their new initiative, the Hope Project, providing educational support for children of incarcerated parents. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Rachel said, looking at her father, and every mistake can lead to something beautiful if we're brave enough to learn from it. As the evening wound down, Rachel found a quiet moment with Hope in the garden. Ethan joined them, loosening his tie. "Happy Mrs. Sterling?" "Happy Mr. Monroe Sterling," she corrected with a smile. They had both chosen to honor both families in their names. Hope babbled happily, reaching for the flowers. "You know," Rachel said thoughtfully, "when I first came to that clinic for a routine physical, I thought my life was set. Small apartment, teaching degree, quiet life. I never imagined that a medical mistake would give you all this." Ethan gestured around. "That a medical mistake would show me what was possible," Rachel corrected. "Love, family, purpose. It was all waiting. We just needed a little push from destiny. And a very determined baby." Eleanor joined them, taking Hope into her arms. "Who's ready for her story? Grandma Sarah's waiting in the nursery." As Eleanor walked away with Hope, other family members drifted over. Jenny was showing William her ideas for the next foundation project. John and Sarah were dancing slowly to the music. Dr. Chen was deep in conversation with Thomas about expanding the foundation's medical support programs. "Look at them all," Rachel leaned against her husband. "Every person here has a story of something broken being made whole again. Starting with us." Ethan kissed her softly. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Hope was asleep surrounded by her army of loving grandparents, Rachel and Ethan stood in their garden. "So," Ethan said, "ready for our next chapter?" Rachel looked at the mansion that had become a true home, thought of their daughter sleeping safely upstairs, and felt the love of their blended family surrounding them. "You know what? I think we've already started it." Above them, stars twinkled in the spring sky, and somewhere in the distance a baby's laugh echoed through the halls of the Sterling mansion, now filled with more love, hope, and second chances than anyone could have imagined possible. That's the thing about life's biggest mistakes. Sometimes they turn out to be fate's greatest gifts. All you need is the courage to embrace them, the strength to learn from them, and the love to transform them into something beautiful. For Rachel and Ethan, their story wasn't just about a medical mix-up or a rich man falling for a poor girl. It was about family, redemption, and the kind of love that builds bridges across any divide. As they held each other under the stars, they knew that every step, even the hardest ones, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. And baby Hope, sleeping peacefully in her lavender nursery, would grow up knowing that she was born not from a mistake, but from a miracle of love that changed not just two lives, but an entire world of possibilities. The end.